Hello, everyone, and we'd like to welcome you to our Office of Field Education Employment-Based Field Placement Information session. We are here to explain all the details about how to fill out the employment-based field application, as well as very important considerations about whether or not an employment-based field placement is the best option for you. My name is Dr. Yanni Robinson, and I am the Assistant Director for Field Education for the online program. And I would like to now introduce my other team members, allow them to introduce themselves so that you can know who is presenting in this webinar today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Dadswell. I'm also an Assistant Director of Field in the School of Social Work here. I'm also a faculty, and I'm the Residential Program Assistant Director.
Hello, everyone. I'm one of the field placement coordinators here at the university.
And hello, I am also a field coordinator with the university, and Claire and I mostly work with the online out-of-state students in securing field placements.
Thank you, Claire and Talia. Now, today we are going to be talking a little bit about the field team that will be working with you as a student. We'll talk about the EBP requirements, and if this is something that is possible for you, the timeline for non-local students, as well as the timeline for local students. And then we will do an application review and what's next and frequently asked questions. Before we begin, though, I would like to express that we work as a team in the Office of Field Education, and it is the Michigan difference that we have a full team supporting our students. And so these individuals work together to secure your placement, but also to help you troubleshoot any challenges that should arise. Even when your primary field faculty is out of the office, there's always someone available. On this slide, you see our administrative and our leadership team. And then on the next slide, it's our field faculty team. You may be working with any one of these individuals for your field placement. In some cases, you might work with multiple individuals during the placing process, but we are always working behind the scenes as a team together. So now, I'd like to talk to you about how we work together. Because there's so many people on your team, I want you to be aware of the different roles that are involved. So you are the MSW student, and we are all here to support you through your education and to help make this process as smooth as possible for you. The next person I'd like to talk about is the field instructor, the MSW field instructor in particular. This is the person who is a master social worker, and the requirement is that they be at least 2 years post graduation from an MSW program, but they may also be required to have a clinical license if the field placement requires licensure. It's depending on that, but the minimum requirement is 2 years post-master's. This individual may or may not be employed at your field site, but as they could be an external MSW. The next person is the task supervisor. This person will be employed at the site, and they are the person who is the primary person who gives you your tasks. For an employment-based placement, this is typically your general supervisor. This is the person who is currently supervising you at your place of employment, who helps direct your day-to-day tasks. The difference between the field instructor who's an MSW and the task supervisor is your MSW field instructor will be the person who guides your social work competency development. This is where your classroom learning will come into play. During your supervision, you will talk about the social work values, principles, and competencies in the different things that you're doing. Whereas your employment supervisor or task supervisor is the person who's going to just tell you the things that you'll be doing day to day, not necessarily how it aligns with the social work values and principles and ethics. Next will be the field faculty. When you think about faculty, think about like school and professors. This is the person in the field office who will be responsible for guiding your education throughout your whole time here at the School of Social Work. This person will be the person who gives you your grade. It is not your field instructors. And this is something we put in place so the students can feel confident sharing feedback and having open dialogue and developing their professional skills in their placement without fear of retaliation or any type of risks, because we are the persons who give you your grade. We also have our field coordinator for the online program. The field coordinator assists with placement when you are going through the EBP process. So they may send out your application materials. They may meet with your employer to talk about what the requirements are, and then they walk you through how to submit your application. And then finally, our MSW as social work admin team, they are the ones who will work through processing your paperwork. They follow up with the agency to make sure that they submit their materials that are required, following up with an affiliation agreement if that is required, and also any new program forms.
So what exactly is an employment-based placement, an EBP? An employment-based placement is really when a student wishes to do their field placement at the same agency where they are already employed. Students seek to have their agency be the place where they complete their field course experiential learning component of this MSW program. So can you do your field placement where you're employed? That's a possibility. It depends on several factors, and that's exactly what we'll cover for you today so that you can make an informed decision on whether you would like to pursue next steps of applying for this opportunity. Field placement is not a job. There are several key differences. Field is an experiential class with U of M field faculty as your professor. It's not a job or an internship. It's a class in which students have the opportunity to practice in real-world environments with course requirements and assignments. You will identify learning goals that will guide your learning experience that may differ from your employment-related performance goals. Really, the main purpose of field placement is your learning and may require you to do things outside of the current scope of your practice at your place of employment because you have to fulfill Master of Social Work competencies. We'll talk more about that, which you have not worked towards in your place of employment up to this point. So knowing that field is a class, I think it's important to really ask yourself the following questions. First off, is your employer open to supporting this opportunity as an educational experience for you within your current role or in another role within your place of employment? Also, are there opportunities at your place of employment to develop, engage, expand practice experience with the 9 social work competencies while also reflecting the MSW pathway focus at a master's level that's really above and beyond what you're currently able to do as part of your job duties? Do you have an MSW field instructor who meets the requirements of our program? Next, we'll talk through the requirements of the MSW field instructor. We touched on that briefly, and we'll circle back to that again because it's very important. Also, is an employment-based placement the best option for you? It requires making a long commitment to it for basically almost the whole duration of your program in the MSW program. So if any disruption occurs related to your employment, that will disrupt your educational experience and your progress. It may cause delays and have financial and graduation implications. Important to think about those considerations. So if you answer to those first 2 questions, if your answer is definitely not, then you may consider thinking of alternates and not pursue an employment-based placement. There are many other agencies that we partner with that you can pursue instead if that's the case. If the answer is yes or maybe, then this presentation will be very helpful for you to understand the next steps.
An EBP field placement is not right for everyone. It is important for you to think about how this may be a great option for you and for many other students, but it's not always because of the potential for delay in your graduation and the significant financial costs that a change in placement could have on a student. So it's really important for you to carefully consider whether an EBP is right for you. And we have looked at our experiences with students where it didn't work out, and we wanted to share it with you today, just in case you are in one of these situations. You can think carefully about whether or not you might want to pursue a traditional placement instead of an EBP. So the first consideration is, if you're new to your workplace and do not yet understand whether or not you work well with your supervisor and your colleagues, this is something you won't know within the first several months of your time at a new place of employment. And if you are not clear, you want to maybe pause on establishing a long-term commitment with this site. Second is, if you are already having challenges at your workplace with your supervisor, colleagues, with your work performance, with the work environment, any type of challenges may be exacerbated with an employment-based placement, because now you're introducing a new element, which is the educational opportunity that is associated with a field placement. And we are asking employers to keep those separate, your employment work and your opportunities to learn as a student, which is additional responsibility. They may be frustrated if they're doing you an additional service and they feel that you are already having work performance issues. It could later cause a disruption. A third consideration would be, will you have enough social work related tasks in your regular work assignment that will allow 16 to 24 hours of field placement tasks? This is important because sometimes students are doing some social work related tasks in their employment, regular employment. However, it may not be enough to sustain the placement for 16 to 24 hours per week for the duration of your placement. And then the last one we'll cover today, although this is definitely not the final thing, we want you to be mindful of any additional considerations, is, have you been thinking about leaving your placement already due to the tasks, due to supervisors, due to any issues in the work environment? If you're already dissatisfied at your place of employment, engaging in an additional 12 to 16-month commitment in this environment could be daunting, because if it's already difficult to get up, go to your work, and to stay there because of issues in the environment, you're now signing up to say, I'm going to stick this out for another 12 to 16 months. It's a big commitment. So we do not want students to get halfway through and then have a disruption, because it would result in an unsatisfactory grade. The student would have to redo that term, and then the costs and the delays in graduation could be significant. And this is something we would like for students to avoid, if at all possible.
So we also wanted to share a little bit about the requirements that we look for with an employment-based placement. So we will get into this a little bit further, but first and foremost, the criteria that we recommend with students is that the employer agrees to provide educational opportunities to develop and expand the student's professional experience to include learning experiences reflecting the 9 social work competencies of your MSW pathway. So this is important, thinking about that pathway element as well as those 9 competencies, which will be the foundation. So it will have to be tailored to whichever pathway that you are enrolled in as well. Secondly, the student identifies an MSW field instructor, again, somebody who earned their degree at least 2 years ago and can provide 4 hours per month of individual field supervision, focusing on social work skills and professional identity development. So licensure is also required for most IP positions, just to kind of keep that in mind when looking for that MSW field instructor. Additionally, please note the university will comply with all state licensing and supervision requirements, So requirements which require that for students doing clinical work, their field instructor must have an active MSW license and must disclose their license information to the Office of Education to ensure that we are in compliance. Additionally, a student submits an employment-based placement application and their employer, MSW field instructor and director of field education will all review and approve that plan laid out in that field placement proposal, which is really what the employment-based application is. So we do encourage, please review that employment-based field proposal form for full details to see if your position would qualify for this. So again, these are kind of the initial requirements, but when you're in the application, those will be the final requirements, kind of a full checklist to make sure that your placement will be feasible.
All right, so when you're thinking about identifying who could be your field instructor, your MSW field instructor at your placement of employment, I think about the following requirements. Field instructors must have an MSW degree with at least 2 years of postgraduate experience. So they must have graduated at least 2 years ago and have 2 years of MSW experience. And they must be willing to provide 4 hours a month of individual field supervision, like was said previously. But what if there isn't a field instructor at your agency to provide that type of supervision to you? Meaning like you have a task supervisor, one who's not an MSW, but you don't have an MSW there. In that situation, external field instructors, meaning external to your agency, can be utilized as long as they meet the program and the state requirements, and provided your employer is open to this and that your task supervisor at your agency is willing to participate in things like your site visit with your faculty and with the field instructor, and also they're willing to sign off on your assignments for each term. And as far as the state licensing board, students should begin reviewing and familiarizing themselves with the licensure requirements for the state that they're interested in becoming licensed through. Actually, students may also utilize their state licensing board to search for prospective field instructors if that's something that you think is needed because there's not one at your agency. Two important things to note here, and they're at the bottom in asterisk. The university will comply with all state licensing and supervision requirements, and that means that for students doing clinical work, the field instructor must have an active MSW license. So again, field instructor must be someone that is licensed if that type of social work requires a license. So some do and some don't. It depends on the type of work they're doing at that agency and the type of social work practice that's involved. A field instructor must be someone that you do not have a familial or a close personal relationship with, as that would be considered a dual relationship and would really be a conflict of interest. In other words, students cannot have a close friend, a family member, or their own therapist as a field instructor. That would definitely be a conflict of interest.
So when considering the steps for this, we did want to share a little bit about what the process looks like for our non-local students. So if a non-local student, which is somebody that is planning to practice 45 to 60 minutes outside of the main Ann Arbor campus, our office will be reaching out about 5 to 7 months prior to you beginning field in order to start the field application process, which will include applying for an employment-based placement if interested in exploring this option further. If you're uncertain about whether you're a local or a non-local student, also please feel free to reach out to our office at any time and we can clarify this as well to make sure that you understand which process and when you should be being connected with. So first and foremost for our non-local students, the first step is watching this video and meeting with your field faculty or your coordinator to review any questions from that point. Afterwards, then you'll select a meeting with your field representative, your employer, and yourself to answer any questions, again, that your employer may have and confirm if they would preliminarily meet the program requirements as a field site. Then we'd have you submit a field application confirming your interest in that employment-based field placement, again, following that meeting. After which we would then have you complete a draft of the employment-based placement application and share a copy of your application to your field faculty or coordinator for final review. Once reviewed, we will either confirm the application is ready for your employer's signatures or provide recommended edits at that time. Then we would have you collect agency signatures from your employer, proposed MSW field instructor, and then that would go to your director for final review or CEO, depending upon your agency and their organization. Then we would have you return a copy of the signed application to your field coordinator or faculty member, who will then share the final draft to our director for the total complete review. At that point, additional edits or clarifications may be requested, and we can usually revise and resubmit before approval if any additional improvements need to happen to the application at that time. However, if during the process the proposed placement no longer feels like a good fit, maybe things change, we would then want to shift to exploring non-employment-based placement options in order to continue your placing and avoid potential delays to your graduation, as we've been noting. So about 3 to 5 months prior to your start of field is when we're hoping to have things kind of solidified, knowing which direction we're moving. If the application is approved, we will share a copy of the approved application to you and your employer, as well as paperwork to your employer in order to create a legal partnership with the university in preparation for you to begin field. So we do need that legal partnership in place before you begin accruing any hours. So please note that it can take up to 6 to 8 weeks to create an affiliation agreement or that partnership with a new field placement, and that we will need this in place before, again, you can begin your term, which is why we begin the process so far in advance to make sure we have time for that. Once the paperwork is fully completed by our admin team and your agency, we will let you and your employer know that everything is prepared for your upcoming placement. So we'll confirm at that time who your field faculty from our team would be, and then we will make sure that you know who you'll be working with, and we'll invite you and your agency to a new agency orientation meeting to make sure that your employer has everything that they need for your internship. And then for you, you would actually be attending our pre-field orientation meeting, which will be between your field faculty and some other students, right? So you can get to know them, kind of similar to a syllabus day at that time. So that occurs about 2 to 3 months prior to you beginning field. So you should know that you're on track if we're about 2 months out from your start of field.
So Talia was really talking through in detail non-local students and their process. And for local students, I'm going to talk about those of you intending to complete field approximately 1 hour or less from the Ann Arbor campus. The next 2 slides I'm talking about are for you. Your placing timeline really depends on whether the agency where you work is already affiliated legally with the University of Michigan or not. So if the agency where you work is not already affiliated and listed as one of our field placement agencies with the University of Michigan, then this slide shows the process for you. So if a student works, first of all, if a student works at a school or a government agency or a big, large corporation or a hospital system, and that's where they'd like to do their EBP because that's where they work, they will need to reach out to our office about an EBP approximately 5 to 6 months before their start of field. That's because the affiliation process with large companies takes longer. It tends to take longer, not always, but it generally does. So we need you to reach out 5 to 6 months before you would consider an EBP start date. If the agency where you work is not one of those types of agencies, you should wait for the field application to open, which you'll be prompted to do via email. That's about 3 to 4 months before the start of your field placement. That field application process is when students will do step 1, attending the Intro to Field webinar, where students will receive further information about how to apply for field. In the next step, step 2, students watch the EBP informational video if they haven't already, which you're doing now today, so good for you. In step 3, the Director of Field Education, Erin Kong, will meet with the student and with their employer and just generally discuss the EBP. That's called the new agency meeting. In step 4, if an EBP is preliminarily approved, then the student fills out an EBP application fully, and the agency fills out all of their new program forms as well. In step 5, the student shares the completed EBP form with their field faculty in the Office of Field Education. They can then review that and give feedback. And students then also ask their agency to sign their EBP application, their employers, and then return that completed application to their field faculty in the Office of Field Education. In step 6, the Director of Field Education will review the EBP application for approval. And if approved, they will move on to step 7. The U of M field faculty will meet with the agency and the field instructor and task supervisor to discuss the EBP. If not approved for some reason, the student will then need to seek alternate field placement options. But if approved, a student will be considered officially placed at that agency. To be clear, before a student starts their field placement hours, the agency needs to have completed all of their paperwork as well as their affiliation agreement and have a new agency onboarding site visit meeting with the field faculty for that student. That meeting does not include the student. Okay, and this slide next is also for local students who are intending to complete field approximately 1 hour or less from the Ann Arbor campus. And the agency where you work is already affiliated. So that means there's already a legal agreement with your agency and the University of Michigan. The process is similar, but it's slightly quicker because there's already an affiliation in place. So for those students, 3 to 4 months before they start field placement, the student will be notified to attend an Intro to Field webinar. In that webinar, they receive EBP info and information about the field application process. In step 2, the student watches this video and submits their field application when it's due. Again, students get an email letting them know when to submit it. And on that application, students indicate their interest in doing an EBP. So that's a clear box that you would check, and on the field application, make it clear that that's your plan. In step 3, a student is assigned a field faculty in our office who will send the EBP application to the student and answer any questions, of course, as long as the student has already watched the video, and assist in any questions regarding filling out the EBP application. In step 4, the student's field faculty in the Office of Field Education will connect with the field instructor at the student's employment that they hope to work with, or the field instructor that is external to their agency, and meet with them and discuss the EBP with them and the social work competencies. And unless that field instructor is already established as a field instructor with U of M. So meaning they've already had U of M students, they've supervised them, and they're an active field instructor with U of M. In that case, they probably won't need to meet. Sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not. In step 5, the student shares their EBP application with their field faculty for review and asks any questions and receives any feedback for revisions if needed. The student can then ask their agency to sign it, and once it's signed and fully completed, in step 6, the student emails that completed EBP application to their U of M field faculty, their final version. Step 7 is when the field faculty reviews it and may have some revision requests. In step 8, the Director of Field then reviews it for approval. And then in step 9, if the student is not approved, the student will pursue an alternate placement. However, if it's approved, again, just like in the other scenario, the student will be considered officially placed there. So I know I talked through a lot. Just know that the reason that we noted these in writing on the slide is so that you can tag this and use this as a reference as you go through this process. We also want to share some information about the application itself for employment-based. So again, that's different than the initial field placement application. I'm referring to the employment-based placement application. So today we're going to overview the application itself, considerations, and also walk through the elements that you're going to want to be aware of when you're talking to your employer and when you're coming to meet with us, to make sure that you have all the tools that you need in preparation for this process and are able to determine if this is a good fit for you. Just to clarify, all students will need to submit a field application, whether they're doing an EBP or not. However, those interested in an EBP will submit also this additional EBP application as supplementary to their field application. And that's the part we're talking about next, is the EBP application. So we'll be overviewing the steps involved in this additional EBP application, which students who are interested in that option will complete after already having submitted their general field application.
Okay, now we're going to walk you through the application. I know we're talking about lots of different things conceptually, but now we want to show you what you'll actually see when you submit your application and give you some guidance. So this will be an important part of the video to bookmark and come back to when you are submitting your application. So in this first section of this example EBP application, you will first enter your student information, of course, but then you will select your program track and your specific field schedule. And this is important to fill out every single box and write in what's required for each one, particularly in your field schedule. Write out your first term, second term, and then spring, summer 2025, fall 2025, winter 2026, and so on and so forth in the subsequent boxes. And then in section 2, this would be about your proposed field placement site, which is your place of employment. You will begin with a brief description of your current place of employment, and then write out all of those details, where it's located, the name of your director, your student information, as well as the supervisor information. Again, please submit something for every box because we want to be sure that there is not missing information. If there's something you do not know, please go to your employer and find the answer to the questions, because these are reasons that your EBP would be returned to you or not accepted by or approved by our field director. So it's important to fill out all the details in every box. At the bottom, in the job description box, we would like for you to add a description of your current employment, especially your social work tasks, but we want you to include all the tasks that you do, because sometimes students are engaging in the social work competencies and they don't even know that that's what they're doing. So those hours may also apply for toward their field hours. So we want to review all the things that you're doing. So please either add your job description to that box, or supplementally in a separate handout, or create a very detailed outline of what you do. If you do things that are not in your formal job description, please add that to the box as well. In addition, please confirm your employer supervisor and your field instructor. The employment supervisor and the field instructor could be the same individuals. Sometimes they are the same. If they are the same individual, though, we want to see separate supervisions. So if there is, if you have one master social worker who is providing both your MSW supervision and your task supervision, we want there to be a student field placement supervision where you specifically talk about the social work competencies and development, separate from the day-to-day tasks, like, hey, don't forget to do this report, don't forget to do this, don't forget to do that, because student supervision is learning based, it's competency development based, and it's not about the doing. Your employment is about the doing, it's what you're getting paid for, so it's really about getting the job done. But we definitely want to have space for you to do the learning with your employment. And that's where that second supervision come in. Typically, in an employment-based placement, there are two separate supervisors. So there is a task supervisor and then a separate individual who's doing the MSW supervision. So it's naturally separated in that way. We do ask students to guide that supervision agenda. So you are talking specifically about the supervision requirements. Both of these individuals, your task supervisor as well as your employment supervisor, will work together with your field team. And I'm going to bring this image back up that I went over briefly earlier, talking about the different roles. So your MSW field instructor is the individual who's doing that competency development, and the task supervisor on this chart, you can see that they are the persons who are doing your day-to-day tasks. Both are working with the field faculty and the field coordinators during the placement process, but then they will continue working with the field faculty after your place and throughout the entire 12 to 16 months of your placement, if you are a regularly scheduled student, or 8 months if you are an advanced standing student. Our field coordinators will work with you during placement, but then after that, they will pass you along to your field faculty and they will continue working with you. And then our admin team, they support us administratively during processing paperwork and any changes administratively to your file throughout the entire time of your placement. Next, in section 3, we want to talk about your proposed field placement role. So this is what you're saying: for 16 hours a week, this is what I'm going to do for my field placement. So you will describe your proposed field placement, the functions, the tasks, and the responsibilities that you would do that align with the 9 social work competencies. So essentially, you'll be pulling from your job description all of those social work related tasks. And then you'll say, these are the tasks that will be counted toward my field hours and that I will be discussing in supervision in order to develop my competency. You may also be in an employment-based placement, but in a separate department completely. So this might be a situation where you might be a case manager in your employment, but for your field placement, for 2 days a week, you're in a different department during therapy, or vice versa. So, so that probably wouldn't happen vice versa, because you probably won't be qualified to be therapists, but in any different type of department where you can count all of those field hours, and it's totally separate. It's a separate department, separate supervision, and that you're not counting your job hours. Occasionally, though, we do have students who might count 8 hours of their employment and then 8 hours in a different department, and that would be acceptable in order to get a diverse range of experiences in their place of employment. Let's see. So you also want to outline what you're currently doing in your current role and responsibilities, but then how might you expand that? Now that you're moving into your graduate program, how do you move these bachelor level tasks and responsibilities to a master level social work field placement? And the way you do that, what makes you qualified to have this bachelor level experience to be bumped to the rigor of a master level placement, is through the integration of your coursework and the learning that you're doing in your supervision. So this is very important. And you want to outline that. How are you expanding this? How are you bringing in your coursework and your learning from your master's program into your field placement to bump that from a bachelor level field placement, place of employment into a master level field placement? Okay. Now I want to share section 4 with you. This is your proposed weekly schedule. In this section, you are going to outline what your plan is in order to get all of your business taken care of, particularly around your employment hours, your placement hours, your field placement hours, as well as your coursework. This is where in this example, it shows when the student is going to be working with the letter E for employment, and then it shows their field placement hours with the letter F, and C indicates the coursework that they're doing in the evening. We want you to outline this very explicitly. Do not leave any of these sections blank, and account for all of your employment hours and all of your field placement hours and your coursework, so that your supervisor can see what this commitment entails. You will also be able to outline this schedule, this proposed schedule, and understand, is it really feasible for you, considering all of your other competing demands, being a family member? Some people are caregivers, some people have other responsibilities. So you want to make sure that this is a feasible plan. And then this is what our field director will review when approving your proposed EBP, to make sure that it is feasible. So please be sure to include all of these and indicate it with an E, an F, and a C. And please note that this could change. So let's say after your first term, your days change. That's okay, because you will indicate those changes in your placement verification form. This is just to get you started. In the fifth section, this will cover the most important section of the application, since it will be the part of the application that will align your engagement in your employment with the 9 social work competencies and your pathway. There is no EBP without this alignment. So if you cannot outline this and demonstrate tasks that you do in your place of employment with and align that with the social work competencies, it's automatic. It doesn't qualify for an EBP, because you have to be able to grow your competencies in your field placements. That's the purpose of field. So this is a very important part of the application. So we would like for you to spend a decent amount of time here. We have linked the competencies in the application so that you can understand what it means, what each competency entails, the practice behaviors, and then you can start making those connections, how what you're doing aligns with those competencies. If you have questions about it, you can also contact our office and speak with our field coordinator or your field faculty to say, hey, these are the things I'm doing, but I'm not quite sure how it aligns with the competencies. Can you help me align how this specific behavior aligns with the competency? I know I'm working with people, but I can't make the connection. We do this all the time. So we may be able to offer you language and supports and connection that you wouldn't be able to do on your own because it's your first time doing it. So please don't hesitate to use our team as a resource for that. The next thing is you want to talk about the tasks that you anticipate completing, not just the tasks that you're actually doing in your placement. So you can talk about the integration of your coursework. You may plan an evaluation. You may plan a policy review. Policy reviewing may not be a part of your normal 9-to-5 work, but as an integration of your coursework, you can then review your policies that are existing in the agency, and that could be one of the competencies that you work on. And then that can move to a policy proposal, for example, in your next term where you're working to do research and on the agency needs, the history of the policies, and then you can make a draft. This is a way to practice the competencies. So you can also think about things that you are already doing outside of just the day-to-day, the day-to-day tasks that you do in your employment that could also fit your competencies. For example, attending a crisis intervention training 1 to 2 times per year, and how you would use that and learn and process that in supervision could be one of the competencies that you demonstrate both here as well as on your educational agreement. Because once this is approved and you're actually in your field placement, every term you will do an educational agreement, and this will be a part of the ongoing responsibility of aligning what you're doing with the social work competencies and tasks.
So similar to Dr. Robinson, I'm going to talk a bit more about the competencies. So that really the most important part of field education is that it provides opportunities for you to do that master level work that connects to these 9 competencies listed on this slide. So the Council on Social Work Education, CSWE, is our accrediting body, and field placements must meet and have opportunities for you to practice these 9 competencies while you're at your employment, if you're doing an employment-based placement. So if you're not already familiar with these, that's okay. You will be very soon. All MSW students across the country are trained with these in mind, and all MSW programs have these integrated into the class curriculums. All students in all pathways will be practicing these same 9 competencies in their field placement. However, how they do these competencies, depending on the context, is different. So let me give you an example. A student who's in the interpersonal practice pathway, let's say they're placed in a hospital. in the hospital, in field placement, they might assess a patient who's come into the ED, and they might do an assessment to determine if they need inpatient hospitalization or not. While, and on the other hand, a management and leadership pathway student might be in an agency where assessment for them means creating a needs assessment to identify gaps in training for employees there. So both students are practicing that skill of assessment just in a different way. So these non-competencies will be central, absolutely central in your assignments for field. And they're important to keep in mind while you're considering whether there's enough opportunity for master social work competency development at your current place of employment.
So this final section will be navigating difference in role confusion between your field placement and your place of employment. So field is a class, an educational experience, which does differ from employment expectations. So here we've included a section to review and plan how to navigate some of the potential role confusion that can occur between the two hats you wear as learner and employee. So in this section, you'll specifically indicate if you'll be continuing to count hours in the same department or different department, as well as describe how field will be new, different, or expanded from employment tasks. So you'll want to include information about how your employment and field supervision will differ, even if you're counting opportunities in that same department. So, for example, some questions you might consider is, will supervision be provided by the same individual or a separate field instructor? And how do you plan to separate out the weekly supervision hour to review those MSW competencies that we've been discussing? This is essentially an overview of all of the previous sections, including your schedule, your field instructor, tasks, and et cetera, and highlights what it will look like as you lay out this plan. So although this is a very brief section, it is also a very important section as well, which is change in employment status policy. So this is kind of referring back to what Dr. Yanni Robinson was referring to earlier. So while the application is considered almost complete, there's a few considerations to really take into mind in this section. So if you are approved for an employment-based placement, this will tie your educational experience to your employment. So while this can be a good fit for some students, it can carry additional implications and risks if shifts occur within your organization, supervision, et cetera. So if a change in employment status does occur, we will work with you to find a non-employment-based placement as soon as possible. However, it is possible that this could result in a delay and affect your projected graduation date. So if an employment-based placement does not feel like a good fit after reviewing this with your employer, please let us know as soon as possible so we can begin reviewing those non-employment-based placement options. And for that same reason, we also want to encourage that students be out of that probationary period and feel concrete or established within their agency when applying for an employment-based placement. So make sure you feel concrete in knowing your employer, your supervisor, and your tasks when considering this option. And then lastly, in order to share your application with our field director for final approval, we will need a completed copy with your employment supervisor, field instructor, and the director of your field site, and your signature as well. So please note that, as mentioned previously, one person may cover more than one role. So please prompt these individuals to sign all of those respective fields.
So let's hypothetically say, you don't need to remember all this. You can refer back to that slide where I listed the steps and or my colleague listed the steps depending on your status as a student, where you're practicing field. But let's hypothetically say that you identified a field instructor and a possibly task supervisor, hopefully both. Then you've watched this video, you filled out the field application, you've indicated that you're interested in EBP, you filled out all those application forms, had them signed, it went to the faculty and then to the site director, right? All those steps. And then you had a meeting to discuss it, and it was finally approved by our field director. Then you're halfway through the process since your EBP application was approved. Some students think that once it's approved, that then the process is over, but it's about halfway over at that point. So at that point, once the application is approved, the next steps are that the fully signed and approved application will be emailed to you and your agency. The completion of agency paperwork is started at that point. So this is not done by students. You don't have to worry about that piece. This happens between our office and the agency itself. You can, of course, prompt that process along if it's helpful, but that's something that we do. If your employer is already legally affiliated with the school of social work, then our Office of Field Education will confirm that the documents we already have on file, things like the program form and field instructor applications, making sure that those are current and up to date. And if not, our office will send out and ask for updates if needed. Once all paperwork is received and processed, we will connect your assigned field faculty you into your agency. So you'll know who you'll be working with moving forward as your field faculty. Next, if your employer needs to create a legal affiliation with the School of Social Work, meaning there isn't currently a legal agreement and an affiliation agreement with your agency and University of Michigan, then this process in itself can take about 6 to 8 weeks. Keep that in mind. Then we will send the necessary paperwork to your agency to create a legal affiliation agreement with them. And then once that paperwork's completed and signed by both the School of Social Work and your agency, we'll connect your assigned field faculty, your agency, and to you for a new agency site visit, which is kind of like an orientation for your field instructor and or task supervisor. So your field faculty and the people who will be supervising you and your field instructor, as well as your task supervisor, they will meet and discuss moving forward the EBP and what that will entail. Next, number 3, students will attend pre-field orientation. This pre-field orientation is actually at the very start of the semester for students. So right as they're beginning field and starting actual field, that's when they attend pre-field orientation. And that same week, they will begin their field hours.
Awesome. So here we've included some frequently asked questions for your reference. The first being whether you will need to submit an EBP application if your practicum experience will be in a different department. So yes, we do want to make sure you have a plan as you navigate your roles and employment hours between separate departments. So we do want a formulated plan that your employer is on board as well as the additional department. The second one being whether you will need to submit a field application if you're interested in an EBP. So yes, all students will need to submit that initial field application. And if you're interested in employment-based placement, you'll be able to indicate that within the field app and then proceed to fill out the EBP application that we've reviewed today. The third one being whether you can count more field hours than you're registered for in field credits. So you can only count the amount of field hours you are registered for per term, which can be no more than 24 hours per week. If your employment supervisor and field instructor are the same, can you count your regular supervision towards your field supervision? So no, students will need 1 hour of separate dedicated supervision to focus on those MSW competencies that we've been talking about today. And then lastly, will your placement be all set once that EBP application is approved? So as we've named previously, it does depend on whether we already are affiliated and have a partnership or if we need to create that affiliation and partnership. So for those who have a current affiliation, we are most likely almost done. And if no additional paperwork is needed, the placement will be solidified. And at that point, a field faculty will be assigned if one has not been assigned already. But for those who are looking for a new affiliation, we are about halfway there. We have that approval, so we know where we're going, but your agency will need to submit that new agency paperwork, which, as we noted a few times previously, it can take about 6 to 8 weeks to do that. So we do want to start that as soon as possible and attend that new orientation meeting as well. So after processing all this great information in the presentation today, if you're still interested in exploring an EBP, here we've included some next steps for your reference. Regardless of whether you're a local or non-local student, you will want to start off with a discussion about EBPs with your employer and your MSW field instructor.
So we know that was a lot of information, but we are still here. Even though we've given you this information, we're here to support you through every step of the process and to guide you and answer any questions that you have. A few key reminders I want to offer you today is to, number 1, know your academic course plan and when you are starting field. Sometimes students they have no idea when they're starting field and then they end up being late. So it's important to, number one, make sure you're checking your UMich email because we're reaching out to you when it's time for you to start field. And then even if we don't know when we should be reaching out. So the way you do that is look at your academic course plan, see when you're starting social work 515 or 691, and you should be hearing from us as a local student one term ahead. Local students are people who live in Southeast Michigan. So one term ahead, you will be starting your placement process. So that would be in May, for example, for a student who's starting their field placement in fall. And for non-local students, that will be 2 terms ahead. So if you are living out of the state, for example, you would hear from us by the end of January, beginning of February for a fall placement starting in September. So very, very important to understand when you're starting field. And if you have not heard from us as a non-local student by 6 months out, please reach out to us and say, hey, I thought I should hear from somebody by early February. I haven't heard from you. I just want to make sure that everything is, I have the correct information and you have the correct information, and we'll look that up to confirm. If you're not sure if you are local or non-local student, and you live 45 minutes to 60 minutes outside of Ann Arbor, you can also reach out to our office to confirm whether we have you listed as a local or non-local student, and confirm by when you should hear from our team. So we want to thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to supporting you and working with you through this process. And I want to say right now, go Blue, and good luck with your education.